Okay, I think we might as well get started. My name is Jason Vanderhoven, I'm an ecologist with Juna, and I will be chairing these sessions to the New Technologies Seminar, also known as the Seminars for Technology Nerds. First up, we got Wolfgang Leaf, who's going to be talking about the imaging submerged structures along Adelaide coastline using an airborne full small footprint bathymetric laser scanner.
Yes, thank you. And I first have to say that I'm not Wolfgang Leaf, but I'm standing in for him. I'm the number 2 on the list. I'm Jörg Hacker from Airborne Research Australia. Don't worry about that. I look different. And I'm the chief scientist of this organisation. Very quickly, we've been with Flinders University for something like 30 years. But right at this instant, we are moving out of Flinders University and become a not-for-profit independent research institute, which is a very exciting time for me. Does it sound better? Oh yeah, that helps. Of course, this is one. And before I go on, I wanted to say one other thing, and that is, or two other things actually. The motto of this conference is sharing research for better outcomes. I had to, in a way, smile when I saw this, because on our new website we have a whole area dedicated to sharing is the key. So in that context, all the data that we collected over the last 2 decades is in the public domain, and it's data like what you will see in a moment. That's all available. And what I'm showing today, that's the last thing I wanted to say before I start. All of the data that you see today was done completely unfunded. Nobody paid for that. We did this all in our own framework. All right, bathymetric LiDAR. Now, I guess most of you will know what that means. LiDAR is sort of sending pulses down to the Earth from an aeroplane, and you measure what comes back. But normally LiDAR doesn't see through water, whereas bathymetric LiDAR can look through the water. It sees the water surface, and it also sees what's on the ground of the seafloor, including things like seagrass and so on. So, in very general terms, data coverage, and I'm not meaning any specific data, it's just data as such. In the green areas, there is incredible amounts of data. Everybody has millions of points of data from satellites, from walking around, photography, everything. In land areas, urban areas, industrial areas, so that's great. Now, in the yellow areas, like mangroves, saline ponds, Barker Inlet, sandbars, there's also a hell of a lot of data, but it's definitely less, and we probably would want to know a bit more, especially at high resolution. When you now go into the red areas, like here we go. If you go into the red areas, seafloor, seagrass, sand transport underwater, surely there's data available, but not a great deal. And that's exactly the area where our new instrument works. So, if you want to know something about the sand structure underwater, or a shipwreck, or channels underwater, you have a whole range of possibilities. You can go diving, possibly with an underwater camera. It's great, but it works only for small scales, and even for small areas, it's a lot of work. Or you can go wading with a stick, if your water is shallow enough. And I'm mentioning this because that was actually done in a project where we worked together with CSIRO. They spent weeks with their stick, sort of sounding the depths. We were flying overhead. At that time, we could only see the dry areas. Had we had the new instrument, we could all of that done probably in 2 days. You can use multi-beam acoustic sounders, which are great tools, and they have about the same resolution. And they're great for small areas, high resolution, but the larger area gets, it very quickly becomes expensive. And also, you have to get there with a boat. So to do this, for instance, in the St Kilda saline flats, you wouldn't be able to do that. You can also, and now we're getting into newer technology, you can use what's called a hyperspectral scanner, looking down. It's a passive instrument, and in certain spectral ranges you can see through the water, and if you then use some spectral tricks, you can actually determine how deep the water is, what is down there. It's possible, we've done it 7 years ago, and in between too, but you need reasonably clear water, and the processing of the data is very expensive, it's very complex, and there's only very few experts in Australia who are able to do that. So our latest toy is a so-called green LiDAR. It's a LiDAR working in the 500 nanometer band. You shoot that down with a pattern like this while you fly along, and that sees the first reflections comes from the water surface, and the second reflection comes from the sea floor or whatever is there. You can also see birds or sediments and things like that. There are not many bathymetric LiDARs available in the world. We are very lucky to have one. It also needs reasonably clear water, and I would say you can see down to something like, if Secchi depth tells you something, 1 to 2 Secchi depths, which equals here in the relatively clear waters, down to about 20 meters or something like that. So it's really a coastal tool. And not only that, we have now mounted one of these onto one of our rather small research aircraft, and that makes the whole thing very viable for small research projects, or just for having a quick look, like what's this sandbank like? That can be done in one day. You look at the data, fine, there it is, and you don't have to charge $100,000 for it. So, a bit more about these two methods. Hyperspectral measurements require very clear skies, no cloud, and within 2 hours of local solar noon. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make sense out of the measurements. You need simultaneous ground-based spectral measurements, so somebody has to go out there with a boat and measure the spectral characteristics of the water. The processing, as I already said, is very complex, and you get about 1 to 3 meter typical pixel size on the ground, underwater. The LiDAR, weather, doesn't really play any role because it's an active instrument. You actually send the LiDAR beam down, which means you could even do it at night. And in fact, night surveys for that instrument are quite good because it's dark and the LiDAR sees a bit further down. You need absolutely no ground-based measurements whatsoever. You have to be careful because you have to fly at a certain minimum altitude. So if somebody looks up, even with binoculars, that their eyes don't get burned out. But that's all. That the fish, you don't hurt the fish. So you have to fly, in our case, at a minimum of something like 400 meters above the water. No problem. The processing is sort of medium complex, but it's doable. And you get structural information. So like if you look at a shipwreck, you will see the structure of the ship, not just that there is a ship. On top of it, as a little bonus, you get the wave patterns of the surface. And the resolution is just stunning. Typically 20 centimeters to 1 meter in all 3 dimensions, horizontal and vertical. So let's look at some data. I always find that the most interesting and probably the most illustrative to see. Now, if you, for instance, were interested in that area there, that's just north of Outer Harbour, offshore from St Kilda, and that's just a Google Earth picture. So you can use that, but you probably will not see really that much unless you're just only interested in the shape and things like that. Now, we flew that area 7 years ago with our then hyperspectral scanner and went through a lot of processing. I mean, it was really a very complex project. And we worked with Curtin University in WA and with a few others. And then that is the result. So you see the seafloor elevation on a 3 meter spatial resolution down to something like 7.5 meter. And you see especially a feature which we call, I don't know if that is called that, but we just called it the St Kilda Channel. That's right here on that sandbank that we just saw on Google Earth. Now, just 1.5 weeks ago, we flew that with that new bathymetric LiDAR. And here is what you get there. This is about 0.5 meter resolution. And in fact, when you boost it a bit, you can probably even boost it to something like 20 centimeter resolution. And it also goes down to about the same depth. So, interestingly enough, the hyperspectral bathymetry is pretty similar to the LiDAR bathymetry. That's an independent comparison whether the measurements make sense, because unless somebody can tell me that there is bathymetric data of that area available, which I don't think so, it would be great to have a verification, but there is no data. We've done other verifications and it actually fits. But when you look at the detail there, it's just absolutely stunning. You see the underwater sand ripples. You see there's a 10 meter wide channel that is 2 meters deeper than anything else, and so on. I'll show a higher resolution image in a moment. So this is from the same data set. This is all underwater structure. So you can see all the little sand ripples here. That's about 6 meters underwater. That's 20 meter distance here, so you can still zoom further in. And you can see this is some beds of seagrass here. You can, if you process it slightly differently, you can see actually the structure of the seagrass. You can tell how high the seagrass is. And just imagine, sort of taking my imagination after having seen this, if for instance you do some dredging somewhere, you fly this every 3 days or every week, and you can actually see the stuff that has been dredged out in the deep depths of the channel. It's an absolutely amazing tool. This is just, again, the two, hyperspectral versus the LiDAR. Also, that LiDAR, at this instant, I mean, this was just our first flight, which is much smaller area, but the features are definitely the same, and even the absolute values. We are planning for next week to fly this whole thing, and then we have 7 years ago with hyperspectral, and next week, that same area with that. So I'll skip this because I explained this verbally, how it works. And there's some 3D views. So you can see the channel and everything else. And I have two more examples, which I may only show you one from the first and one from the second one, just that you see what has been done already and what you can do. I mean, this is obviously a great tool for trying this out. We all know the mouse, and we know that they are dredging there. So we did a very quick test run, and there's no time to go into detail, but you can already see that you can see part of the dredging structure. You can see these underwater sand waves. If you do a bit more processing, you can actually see the seafloor. You can see more details about the sand waves. And if you do this, you will identify, if you go into detail, you will see that some of the areas are fake because there is foam on the water, and then the LiDAR can't see through. And some other areas are also, in a way, fake because the LiDAR can't look deep enough. So it identifies some other areas. So it's not trivial to interpret this, but it's possible. So one needs to do careful planning of the flight missions. This is the best what we so far have, and most of that is correct. The only areas that are not quite correct are this sort of flaky stuff here, where the water is just too deep. The LiDAR can't see the bottom. But the structure you see is absolutely amazing. This is then the subsurface topography. So this is 50 meters horizontal, and you can see the accuracy of the data. This is the little sand waves. It's 10-15 centimeters amplitude. And that's all for real. And to find the other example, some coastal cliffs south of Selix Beach. If you go on Google Earth, you don't see anything. I mean, you just see the coastline and that's it. We flew just one transect, and suddenly the seafloor appears. So that is about 7.5 meters deep at maximum down here. You see the whole rocky structure underwater. You can zoom in a lot, and at the same time you get very high accuracy topography of the land, of the dry. So the instrument is basically a topobathymetric scanner, which gets returns from the land and also returns from underwater. Just for fun, I indicated the water. So everything in that blue area is underwater, and that is something that you simply wouldn't see without that LiDAR. Not in photographs, not in any other means. The only other means you can do it with would probably be multi-beam sonar, but that's quite a different kettle of fish. That's the bonus data you get, the surface waves, and some oceanographers might be interested in it. So that's really the essence. You can do land topography, vegetation on land, underwater topography down to about 10, even 20 meters, depending on water clarity, water surface. But you can also see features underwater and features in the intermediate zone above and below the water, like mangroves. And I'll probably leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you very much.